You know, we've been in 800 prisons during these years across the nation. The missing ingredient is love. We've seen more than 8,000 accept Jesus Christ. And we haven't touched the surface. We go in about 40 high security prisons a year with a message that will change lives. You can be seated. Virginia, many of you know, she gives her life story across this nation. She's truly the inmate friend because she's walked where they have walked. You'll understand in a little while. This has been a dream come true to be here tonight for her, for various reasons you'll hear, and for myself to be here. She has a way of reaching through the Holy Spirit in her testimony. The old hardcore convict, not just the average inmate. Certainly she reaches them too. But I'm talking about the Carl Bowles in Leavenworth tonight. 23 years in Leavenworth, never been to chapel in 23 years till last August. I later found out he saw her walking down the hall through the cell blocks, and he said, I saw a look of compassion I've never seen on a face. That's why I came. I wrote him. The chaplain told me he's the meanest man in Leavenworth, and we're shocked he was here tonight. He sat there and cried. The book, The Hot House, the latest book on Leavenworth. I don't suggest it because of the language, but it's prison talk. He's on every page nearly. We still haven't won him. We've written him 4 letters. He's answered and called us once. That's the type man and women that God is using her to penetrate that old tough shell. Pray for her. Very ill. Dr. Gordon here, the neurologist in your city, says, Virginia, you've got to quit. She said, I will when I get to heaven. Because she's got a mission. And you'll understand in a minute. Please welcome Virginia.
It was a Sunday afternoon. We were headed back into that prison that sits right outside San Francisco, San Quentin. I was even walking a little slower than the rest back then. But all of a sudden I turned and noticed there was someone walking beside me. The young people and Joe were way ahead. I turned, it was Chaplain Howard, the chaplain there at San Quentin. We spoke, and then he shared something. He said, Virginia, I'm real sorry that I could not be with you and Joe and the young people this morning in the service. I hear you had a wonderful service. But you see, we have about 3,000 to 4,000 here in general population. Protective custody is here. At San Quentin, the death row unit is here. Last night, one of the young men on the death row unit somehow was able to get together enough materials to make a rope, and he tried to take his life. So they called for me, and that's the reason I couldn't be with you all this morning. He needed me. I know, Virginia, you don't understand why anyone on a death row unit would want to take their life, but he did, and he needed me. Chaplain Howard did not hear me quietly mutter to myself as he turned to walk away. Oh, yes, Chaplain, I do understand. I know why. Joe told you that we traveled those many years as a mission outreach of First Baptist Church, Big Spring. And I went along as a sponsor. Never said a word, helped with the young people, sat back with the inmates. All those many years with First Baptist, I was watching, looking, listening, paying attention, and remembering everything every summer. Now, as Joe told you, this was back in the 70s, and it was very difficult to get into prisons, especially with young people. So we were the first group ever in Ferguson, Ellis 1. Finally, the first group ever allowed over in Big Mac, over in Oklahoma. We were guarded with a SWAT team on a flatbed truck out in that rodeo. Slowly, doors began to open. And then finally, a tough lady warden by the name of Lucille Plain allowed us to come to her unit, the Mountain View Death Row Unit for Women at Gatesville. No one from the free world had ever walked into that prison as a volunteer. First year, she said, "You will stand up on the stage. Do not walk from behind the wire." She had wire stretched across the stage to make sure we didn't. And we didn't. You know, by the fourth year, Warden Plain knew we obeyed the rules. We did exactly as we were told. So she said, "This year, I'm going to let you stand in line over by the piano, and you may shake hands with the girls as they file by." Now, last night in that TDC unit there at Brownfield, I said, "Guys, do you know what the girls wear? Do you know what the girls wear at all the units up there?" Now there's 5 at Gatesville. About half the crowd shakes their head no. And I look at them and I say, "The same old ugly Texas white grungies that you have on. The same old ugly uniforms." But you know, that day as they filed by, and I got to hug them as they were filing by, I noticed something. Maybe it was their cross. Maybe it was a special pair of earrings. Maybe their hair braided in cornrows. One little special item that they wore to chapel that day. Now the women will say, "Well, if I look a little better, I'll like myself a little bit better." But to me, they were telling me something entirely different. And I do hear voices no one else hears. I'll explain that in just a moment. So I'm going to apologize for the first time tonight. I will apologize several times to you. So please forgive me for what I say next. But as those girls kept filing by, I looked at them, and I I'm very sorry. I got to hug them. I'm trying to hurry too much. I got to hug them as they filed by. And when I noticed this, I thought, this is what they are trying to say to me. And this is a message that only I heard. To me, they were saying, "You bet. You bet. I am here in this maximum security prison. Yes, I wear a number, printed right here on my pocket, printed in bright orange. I know every number in this number that I wear. But you know what? I have a name. I have a name that goes with the number that I wear. I am me. I am a person. I am a human being. I am more than the number that I wear. I have a name." This haunted me. I couldn't forget it. I went back to Big Spring. Now it took me from June clear until October to get up enough nerve to go to Joe. So one day came in from church. I said, "Joe, I want to do something a little bit different." And I was talking real fast. I wanted to hurry and get it out. I said, "Joe, I want to do something different this year at Christmas. I want to go to all 4 women's prisons at Gatesville. I want to put makeup on as many girls as they will allow. I want to leave each one of them with a sack, Joe, with about $50 worth of makeup in it, and I want to go at Christmas time." You know what he did? He just stood there and glared at me. He said, "No way, Virginia. First Baptist Church will never allow this. They will never pay for this." I said, "I don't want them to, Joe. I'll raise the money." Now, I'm an art teacher, so I taught art, sold paintings, sold makeup, and I begged. And when I'm in the prisons, I say, I'm never too ashamed to beg when it's for one of you. And you know I raised $1,500. But Joe's main objection was this: Virginia, you know the rules. We can never take or give anything to an inmate. I don't have time tonight to go into all the details and all the red tape Joe went through, but finally, I was given permission from Mr. Estelle, the then director of TDC, to do something that had never been done in the history of Texas prisons. Now, we had about 15 young people in that group at First Baptist Church, but you know only 2 walked up. Usually you can count on about 2, can't you? Mark and Felicia. They walked up and said, we'll go with you, Virginia, and we'll help you with the makeup in the day. We'll have a concert for the girls at night. So on an old, very cold December 26th day, Joe and I left Muskogee, Oklahoma, our hometown, and those 2 young people left Big Spring. We headed into a very, very special prison there at Gatesville. Now, I went back. I always sat with the inmates. I always asked permission, but I always sat with the inmates. And so I went back and sat with the girls. Everything was going wonderful. They were singing their songs. But all of a sudden, God and a precious little Catholic nun by the name of Sister Kathleen, who was a chaplain over 3 of the prisons there at Gatesville, walked up to Joe. She took the mic from his hand, and she just stood there a minute. She said, Joe, I want Virginia to talk to the girls tonight. If you think I'm scared tonight and I'm terrified, I was scared to death that night. You see, I had never spoken one word in public in my entire life. That Baptist music director right there, I started dating him when I was 16 years old back in Muskogee. He did all the talking in this family. I hid out with the young people. I started teaching you when I was 20 years old over at Calvary. I had never said one word in public in my life. And so they showed me how to hold this microphone. But I couldn't say anything. I just stood there. And then slowly, I began to look all around that huge room. Slowly, I began to look into those girls' faces. And I thought, what does Sister Kathleen want me to tell them? And I stood there a little bit longer and I began to look in their faces a little closer. I thought, does she want me to tell them about the makeup class? But as I stood there, I thought, no. Sister Kathleen knows all about me. She knows about the Virginia that I hate and that I still hate. She knows about the Virginia that I'm so terribly ashamed of and try to keep hidden from the world. She wants me to tell them, as they would call it, and maybe some of you young people might call it, the gut-level truth. But I still couldn't say anything. I still couldn't say a word. And then slowly, one by one, I began to look all around that room. I began to look way back over behind their eyes. Way back over behind their eyes. And I saw tears. I saw tears that had never been shed. Oh, yes. I saw tears of sadness. I saw tears of loneliness, desertion. I saw tears of despair. But people, I saw tears of bitterness. I saw a few tears of hatred. And I will apologize again for what I say next. And as I kept looking behind their eyes, I thought, maybe, just maybe, those girls are a little bit sick and tired of hearing someone from the free world walk into the prison and say, now, girls, if you could get your life together like I have mine, and you could have all of the faith, well, like I have, and you could be a wonderful Christian, well, like I am, everything is going to turn out wonderful in your life. But all the time those girls are sitting there, hating themselves a little bit more, thinking, I can't be like him. I can't be like her. I thought, maybe, just maybe, they were a little bit sick and tired of hearing what I call glorious, victorious, Christian gobbledygook. For you see, people, in the eyes of the world and in very many of your eyes here tonight, my life story is not one of victory, but it's the truth, and so this is what you're going to hear. I said, girls, I've come here mainly for two reasons. I understand what that free world will never understand, the loss of freedom. Do you know we're hated just about as much as the prisoners for our prison ministry? These young people are made fun of. They'll walk up to me and they'll say, Virginia, prison ministry, why? They don't punish them enough. Don't you know they have a TV in every room and they don't do anything all day long? I said, come go with me. I will show you. Channel 8 in Dallas is supposed to do a special on us, and I hope I get to tell the other side of the story. But I looked at those girls that night. I said, girls, I understand what that free world will never understand, the horrible loss of freedom. For you see, I too have been locked behind bars. There were iron steel bars in the windows, tall black iron fences all around the grounds. In many, many mental hospitals. From age 23 up to about 6.5 years ago, I probably had about 260, 280 shock treatments in my life. I lost track. I said, girls, you think I don't know how precious freedom is? I know what it feels like to line up, to take the pill, to take the Haldol, the Thorazine, the Meloril, and all the rest. I know what it feels like to want a cup of coffee. First, you must go ask permission. But I even know more. I even know what lockup feels like. In the prisons, they call it lockdown. I know that loss of dignity when they stripped me that day. They put me in a little strange green gown that ties around the back and some special green booties. Took me to that one lone room. It has a little teeny slit for a window. Tied me down to a very special cot and those unusual sheets that tie your arms back behind you. Left there 10, 12, 14, 18 days. I don't know. I lost count. You think I don't know how precious freedom really is when they unlocked that door and said, you can come out now, Virginia. You see, I'd become friends with a young 17-year-old boy in that psychiatric pavilion in Amarillo, Texas. But I had watched one day. In fact, I'd shared my faith with this young man. I love young people. But I'd watched one day as the police came. They cuffed him and then they shackled him to take him to put him in Rusk, the prison for the criminally insane. And in 1976, Rusk was the total pits of hell. It is no longer. It's a wonderful treatment prison. But I'm what's called a cutter. If you know what that is, I don't have to explain. If you don't know, I could never explain it to you. But when I watched them take the young boy away, I got the razor blades back out of my art supplies and began to cut on my arms again. And this is why they put me in lockup. I said, girls, I know how precious freedom is, but even more than the loss of freedom, I understand the judgments. Now, this is the second time I will apologize to you. Please forgive me for what I say next. But I had to tell them the truth. I said, girls, my judgments are a little bit different from yours. My judgments have come from the Christians. My judgments many times have come from the pulpit, from Joe's choir members. A preacher will stand and say, anyone that goes to a psychiatrist is not truly born again. Another will walk up and say, now, Virginia, if you only had enough faith, if you just had enough faith, you wouldn't go crazy. You wouldn't go back to that mental hospital. You just have faith. I want to tell them it only takes one little teeny mustard seed. But there have been times I could not find the mustard seed. Or, Virginia, you're not really trying. Throw your shoulders back now and you think positive. One year I'd been in the mental hospital so long, had so many shock treatments, I was going to go in church and dash right back out. But Beulah caught me. She walked up, she tapped me, she said, now, Virginia, honey, let me tell you something. Don't you go around thinking those old sad, depressed thoughts you think. You think little happy thoughts. And she sang it, and I wanted to slap her real hard, but I couldn't. She was Joe's choir member. I wanted to say, Beulah, it takes so much more guts inside than thinking little happy thoughts. Or another judgment, you're demon-possessed, we're going to cast a demon out of you. That one frightens me, it still does. Or, Virginia, What terrible sin have you committed that God keeps punishing you? Or aren't you afraid to take art from her? She's crazy. She just got back home from that mental hospital. Aren't you afraid to be alone in the room with her? She might try to kill you. They go on and on. I don't have time to go through all of them. I don't want to. But there's one very, very special judgment. Now, I'm not changing my testimony up till a part that I will tell you. So I ask this every night in the prisons, but I scream it in the free world. I ask, hasn't there been a time in your life, in some of your lives, that you wish that you had one true friend? You see, I would look for a friend that might understand the mental illness. Joe did not understand it all back then. He understands a little bit more now. And I would think if I could only find just one person that would sit down for a few moments and listen and let me explain just a little bit. This is going to be hard for me to say. I had one. She died quite a few months ago. Her name is Josephine Creighton. She's Sharon Stelter's mother. Josephine would listen. But I would keep looking. I think if I could find just one person that would understand. But you know what they always do? They take one step backwards and then they point their finger. They say, Virginia, let me tell you something. If you think you have troubles, man, you haven't heard troubles till you hear all mine. You know, they have a list. It's a mile long. They go from top to bottom. And when they get through, they just stand there. They just stand there and glare at me. They're playing a game. It's another one of those games. It's a game called Can You Top This? They are saying, what are you standing there whining for? I've got so much more to cry about than you. But I say, guys, girls, but I scream, people, and especially when I see young people and parents, I scream, parents, please, please, world, begin to look for the tears hidden behind the eyes. They are not just in the prisons. I talk to too many young people, state FHA, colleges everywhere. Please, please, don't play the game. Look for the tears, look for the hurting people. But as I stood there that night, I said, girls, I have been so very, very fortunate. I've had up until last year a wonderful psychiatrist, Dr. Hugh Pennell, the Psychiatric Pavilion in Amarillo, Texas. And I said there was a judgment that they were so bad. You see, I didn't have to explain to Dr. Pennell what it was like being crazy and being married to a Baptist music director. He understood. He was a Baptist. And but one year there was a judgment so bad that I have never shared it with anyone. And I went back to Amarillo. I said, Dr. Pennell, how do I explain? How do I explain that this mental illness, this psychosis, this insanity, this chemical imbalance, whatever you want to call it, is in their family? My grandmother died in the state mental hospital in Veneta, Oklahoma. I have passed the mental illness on to my son, David, who is manic depressive. He's been in that same mental hospital 2 different times. I have passed the mental illness on to my beautiful daughter, Marta, who, when night before last, when I could not give this testimony, stood at Tuya and gave it for me. I said, Dr. Pennell, how do I explain? He said, you don't. He said, they don't care. They could care less unless it happens to them or someone they love. He said, Virginia, you do what Jesus Christ did on the cross that day. Let them come down and say every little hateful, mean, judgmental statement that they want to make to you, every judgment that they want to say, but don't explain, don't answer back, don't say a word, and don't let them see you. And when they turn to walk away, you say quietly, I forgive you. I forgive you for what you just said to me. You've not walked in my shoes. I am not going to hate you for what you just said to me. It's 70 times 70 times 70. It goes on daily. I said, girls, thank God for that psychiatrist. I could have lived a life of total bitterness. As I looked at the girls that night, I said, girls, your judgments have been so different from mine. Your judgments come from the one I think hurt you the most, as they called him, their old man, their husband. You've been here maybe 6 or 8 months, and you get that special envelope where he's quietly got a divorce from you. Your judgments have come from the friends that said, we won't forget you, we'll write you, but they don't. From your kids that are never in the waiting room to see you. I'm talking about your judgments of the friends and people that you thought loved you so much that walked out on you too. And so as I looked at them that night, I said, but girls, it's still forgiveness. It's still 70 times 70 what Jesus Christ taught. But as I stood there, God had another ready. He had a little inmate. She'd been in TDC so long they nicknamed her Granny. She's in heaven now, but I think she smiles every time I called her name. She was way at the back of the room. She stood up. She gave me a little toothless grin, tilted her little head. She said, honey, Virginia, let me tell you something. We won't ever judge you in here. For the first time in my entire life, since I was a little teeny girl, I'd found a place I could walk into. I didn't have to apologize. I didn't have to play act. I could be crazy and flawed just exactly like I am. And they accepted me. I had finally found a home inside the walls of a prison. And they weren't afraid of me at all. But God had another ready. He had Lieutenant Bell, a wonderful lieutenant there at this unit. She walked up. She said, Virginia, there'll be a little girl in your makeup class tomorrow. Love her. Be gentle with her. She took the life of her baby. She is being isolated and very abused by the rest of the girls. So sure enough, by the next afternoon in that makeup class, by 3 o'clock, no one had spoken one word to Tammy, a tall, beautiful white girl with long, dark hair. I found out later she was from Midland, Texas. I said, Tammy, come on, honey. It's your turn. She sat there in that chair. She wouldn't lift her head. Finally, she mumbled. She said, been where you have. I've had those shock dreams, been in those mental hospitals. I was pregnant when I came into this prison. They took that baby away from me. My first baby died. Tammy could not tell me that she took the life of her first baby. Maybe she did not fully realize it herself. For you see, people, this was the Valley unit. This was the psychiatric unit. This is like the unit that you have right here. I put the makeup on her face. I lifted her to her. I said, honey, you're beautiful. Get your life together and get out of this prison. Tammy's out of prison today, singing and talking to as many young people as will listen and many adults. But you see, people, God has taught me so very, very much the last 10 years that I've been traveling in this full-time prison ministry. He's taught me so very much. For not only did I go to that Valley unit, that psych unit, I went up to the death row unit, up to Mountain View again. But you see, God has taught me so much, and you're not going to understand part of this. So please listen closely. As Tammy turned to walk away that day, I said, Tammy, honey, were the babies by your stepfather? She said, no. No, Virginia, by my real father. But God's taught me so much. As I said, I went to those 2 units, but I went to 2 other units across the road. I went over to Terrace. I went over to Riverside. I went over to the lesbian dorms. You think they didn't heckle me and make fun of me? Oh man, all day long. One of the toughest, she would never quit. And all day long, but I stayed with them. I loved them. I put makeup on their faces and I shared God's beautiful femininity with them. And about 8 o'clock that night when we finished, one of the toughest, she walked up, she put her hand on her hip and she tapped her toe. She had bright red hair and she'd really given me a hard time. She said, didn't like you one bit. Didn't like you at all when you walked in here in those bright colored hose. She doesn't know these cover up those old ugly heavy support hose I have to wear. So I didn't like you at all. But Virginia, you got through to me. You got through to me. I walked into this prison, Butch, but I'm walking out, Betty. Thank you. Thank you for not saying anything. For you see, people, had she not added the last part of that sentence, I would have still loved her. I would have still shared God's beautiful femininity and his plan of salvation. He did not send me in there to judge. He only sent me in there to tell. I judge no one. But you see, God taught me even more. We're in a unit where there are older people, older inmates, like at Ellis One out there, Soledad in California, Protective in Santa Fe, and at Leavenworth. Older man walked down the aisle there at Leavenworth, and security was wonderful that night, and they allowed me to walk out and take his hand. He came sobbing down the aisle. He said, Virginia, do you think there is any way that God would ever accept me too? I said, oh yes. God is not like the free world. He does not pick and choose who he will offer salvation to. He offers it to all who will call upon his name. He said, but you don't understand, Virginia. I am like Tammy's father. That is why I am in this prison. Do you think God could ever accept me too? I looked at that older man that night. I said, oh yes. You get counseling, you get help, you stay here, but God will accept you too. Thank God I told him that. 5 years later, we went back to Leavenworth, and you know who was here to help us roll in the equipment? He met us there at the gate, was that older man. He walked over, he said, Virginia, I didn't want to, but I listened to you 5 years ago. I listened to you. I got help, I got counseling. I realized I am a pedophile. They must never release me from this prison. I must die here in Leavenworth, but I'm going to make it, Virginia. For you see, I have this. And he held up the Bible. Thank God he accepts us all. Now, Joe told you that he told it real nice. He told it real nice about the church. But people, let me add something. Well, can I tell them the truth? They fired Joe. I'm going to talk to the young people. They don't scare me. They fired Joe. And so that when we walked out with nothing. You don't know how many church floors these kids have slept on and how many meals, how many bologna sandwiches they've eaten in the park. So we walked out and we organized a full-time prison ministry. You'll see that we have a United States federal warden as chairman of our board. But it wasn't John Allman, it wasn't Joe Whitten or the prison ministry board that asked me to talk. It was the girls at Mountain View. One brought her friend. She said, Virginia, will you tell what you told Christmas? So my name's not on the van, and I'm on the back of that brochure right where I want to be. But it was the girls. And so I began to share that first summer in prison after prison and church after church. And slowly, all summer long, we went and traveled to the prisons. And then it was August. Big deal, big wheel, big time. Texas, New Mexico, Oklahoma young people going to New York City. They were going to sing for that American Correctional Association. They were going to be on NBC. They were on CNN several years. So this was big time for us to go to New York City. But first we went to Arkansas, Memphis, Nashville, went on up to Philadelphia. Didn't know any Baptist. Didn't know any Assembly, Presbyterian, Methodist, so the Catholics took care of us. The nuns fed us in the convent. I gave this testimony in that huge St. Carthage Cathedral there in Philadelphia that took the people in during the movement when they firebombed those homes. And I talked in every horrible prison in Philadelphia. But on Friday night, we were headed to the state prison there in Pennsylvania, which is a very bad unit. Now, people, I'm going to share something with you. I am technically what's called schizoaffective reactive, a form of schizophrenia. I have hallucinations, delusions, distorted thinking. I am episodically insane. I hover close to that line, and many times I cross over the line from that world of sanity into that world of insanity. And a lot of bad things had happened that summer. We were still grieving about the church. My mother became very ill. And my son, David, he didn't like being the son of a Baptist music director. So David rebelled. We went through 15 years of the drug scene. But kids, I don't believe in tough love, so I wouldn't let Joe kick him out. And I'll tell you where he is a little bit later. But David was arrested again in Odessa that summer. So a lot of bad things that happened I don't have time to share with you. And so when I walked into that prison, I knew that I was very, very mentally ill. But when I walked over to that Catholic priest that I love so much, Father Monet, I said, Father Monet, I cannot talk tonight. I'm sorry. He understood. But you see, people, what no one, I don't think, can ever understand. What was the most horrible thing? I could not talk to the guys, and I don't get to go every night anymore. What's worse than not being able to talk? I could not cry. And when there are no tears on my cheeks, I will never do this again. Do not misunderstand. These tears are not for me. They are for the tears I see hidden behind the eyes, night after night after night. You know what's worse than not being able to cry? It's a deadness inside, a deadness where you feel nothing. It's horrible. Even worse, I could pray. You know what's worse than not being able to pray? I wasn't too sure there was a God even out there to pray to. But one day, I called a wise Baptist preacher from Big Spring by the name of Shad Rue in Amarillo, Texas. I said, Shad, I cannot pray. He said, Virginia, do not try to pray. God understands how mentally ill you are. The Holy Spirit is interceding with groanings and utterings that cannot be heard. He is doing your praying for you. Joe had to put me on the airplane at LaGuardia to send me back home to Big Spring all alone. But all the way on that airplane, I kept remembering Shad's words. So I made it home. Janitor of the church met me. I made it through the first day. I painted 8 paintings. Painting's real good therapy. But Monday morning, when I knew that they would be singing for those 6,000 prison officials, finally I could pray a prayer. Most of this audience will never understand this prayer, but please listen. About 10 o'clock that morning, finally I could pray. I said, oh God, please, please, is it all right with you if I just come on to heaven? I have done your will. I have done things I never dreamed I could do in my life. But God, I don't have anywhere to go. We don't have any insurance. Mother's too sick. The crazy world is closing in. Is it okay, God, if I just come on to heaven? I thought he said, yes, Virginia, come on. So I went into the bathroom and I took the whole bottle of the Quaaludes. I knew that it took the whole bottle, for I had tried once before and I had not taken enough. Now, people, please listen to me. I did not take 3 pills and call someone to come and help me. I wanted to die. I want to die nearly every morning that I get up out of bed. If I could not look in the faces of inmates and the faces of young people, I could not keep on living. But please let me plead with you, even if someone takes only 3 pills, it's a cry for help. Please, if you hear any prayer like this, please listen and get them help. But I wanted to die. It did not take long for the pills to take effect. I passed out. I do not know how long, and I came to only for a brief moment. And I began to see faces, not Joe's, not Marta's, not Mother's or David's. I began to see inmate, Tammy, Debbie, Armina, Kevin, Chauncey, Bo, inmate, name and face. And the only sane thought God put in my head, I thought, oh God, I have hurt you. They will think that I lied to them about you, God. They will not believe you are Almighty Jehovah if I cannot keep on living. So it was for the inmates that I tried to barely dial that O, and that's the last I remember. I was told later that the police came. They broke in the front door with hatchets. They took me and put me in a hospital in a room with no name. That doctor barely saved my life. It was Nitty Joe Elwin, Dr. Ellis from Peppa. And my son David came later and got me out of that hospital. It wasn't until next year that we headed out with a new group of young people that I was able to travel. You see, what I did not realize, God was not through with me yet. He had just a few more things for me to do. Tonight is the last one. One I hold in my hand. We always start out at Gatesville there at Mountain View. So we walked in and I said, Joe, honey, I've talked enough here. I'm going to sit back with the girls. I'm not going to talk. I sat down beside one of the inmates, Vicky Nieto. She'd been in TDC over 22 years. We spoke a few minutes and then she handed me this letter. She said, Virginia, do you know who this is? I said, yes, Vicky. I read the newspaper. She said, read it. I read this letter and then I began to sob. I said, oh, Vicky, let me have it. I will begin to share it in prisons and in churches. I will begin to read it. She said, I'll have to get permission. An officer brought this letter to me in another city on his day off. I know it by heart, and I'm going to quote it, but I hold it to be close to the one that wrote it. This was a very famous case in Texas in all the newspapers, so this is a direct quote. My brothers and sisters in Christ have been beautiful. They are taking some letters and some petitions from some very important people in Houston who are going to try to help me. They're going to Austin on the 23rd to talk to the board. Bless them all, Manita. That is my greatest strength, Manita, knowing that my Lord is in me and will be with me. If they put me to sleep in 2 weeks, this old sinful self will die, and my new life in the kingdom of God will begin. What can be more wonderful than that, Vicky? I've made a mess out of my life, as you well know, Vicky. They had grown up together on the streets of Houston, down on Harbor Street. He said, but since the Lord has come into my life, I have finally found the love and the peace that I have been searching for all of my life. This letter is signed, Love, Rudy Esquivel. He was number 16, scheduled to die after the death sentence was reinstated. So we traveled. Now, let me explain something. I asked for this letter in June. When I asked Vicki for this letter in June, little did I know, when I said, Vicki, let me have it, we were going out to California again. Little did I know that by August I would be putting makeup on the faces of Linda Kasabian and Susan Atkins, two of the Manson girls there at California State for Women at Frontera. But I did not know this in June. So I began to read that letter and quietly watch the newspaper. About 2.5 weeks later, we were headed into a little church in East Texas. It was Sunday morning. I said, Joe, Joe, you must call Huntsville. They will be taking Rudy from LS1 over to the Walls unit to be executed in a few moments. Joe, Rudy must know about Vicky's letter before he dies. Joe said, no way. He said, this is a famous case. It's a very famous case. This man took the life of a narcotics agent. It was a setup, but it was a very famous case. He said, there's press there from New York, LA, everywhere, Virginia. I can't get through. I kept begging. Finally, he got Chaplain Pickett. Joe spoke and then handed me the phone. I said, Chaplain Pickett, tell Rudy this. Tell him I have Vicky's letter. Tell him that in many ways, yes, he did make a big mess out of his life, but tell him, please, his life was not in vain. Tell him he did not make a complete mess of his life. Tell him that more of his buddies that he knows by name, many more that he won't know till he gets to heaven, many that he's been on the cell block with, and many, many in churches, have accepted the Lord, not because of Joe Whitten, his children, or me, because of what an inmate had the guts to write in a letter. I said, Chaplain Pickett, please tell Rudy his life was not in vain. Chaplain said, I will. I handed the phone to Joe. He said, Joe, when will you and the young people in Virginia be singing and talking in Abilene tonight? Joe said between 7 and 9 o'clock. He said, we'll be praying. I found later that Rudy Esquivel and Chaplain Pickett prayed for me from 7 until 10 o'clock, until they took him into that one lone room, 5 walk in, 4 come back out. We got to Abilene that night. I did not want to talk at Wiley Baptist Church. I knew what was going on in Huntsville, but the Holy Spirit prompted me, said, Virginia, go on in there and talk. People, thank God I spoke that night. Thank God I listened to the Holy Spirit. For you see, when I finished, a little gray-haired lady, and I tell this all over the United States exactly this same way, night in and night out, a little gray-haired lady walked down the aisle. She said, thank you, Virginia. Thank you for talking. I think I understand my son just a little bit better now. I think I understand a little bit more now. Her name is Mrs. Ray. Her son is Dr. David Ray, former pastor of the huge First Baptist Church, Lubbock, Texas, former vice president of Hardin Simmons University, former Baptist evangelist. Joe traveled with him many times. Thank God, people, I spoke that night, for you see, 9 months later, that Baptist preacher preached his last sermon at his home church. I walked out and took his life. So I ask all over America, who does a Baptist preacher go talk to when he's dead inside and he can't pray? Could he come here tonight and talk to one of you? He could talk to one of you young people, couldn't he? Thank God I talked. Now what I say right now, I will never, never say again. But the Holy Spirit has told me to say this. For the past 10 years, you see, Dr. Hugh Pennell, my psychiatrist, was David Ray's psychiatrist. He was in the same mental hospital that I was in. So for the past nearly 10 years, I have been listening to all of the judgments of David Ray. He and Joe and I talked together, and Dr. Pennell and David and I were going to try to write a book together. But I've heard so many harsh judgments, so many mean things that have been said. And I think the cruelest was this summer when we went to the youth facility. Now, people, I'm sharing something I will never tell again. We went to the facility for the youth at Gainesville. The young chaplain there, seminary student. I do not have time to go into all the details about his life. But when I spoke of David, he said, yes, Virginia. They taught us in my seminary class about David Ray, that he is the example of burnout. And we examined all the legal papers and the obituary. People, David Ray was never the example of burnout. David Ray had a chemical imbalance, deep depression, just as I do. So you know the question that is asked to me the most. It has been asked by many of you, even Hayes. Why? Why? But you see, when he preached that last sermon and no one came forward, he was so bad, so mentally ill, he thought he could no longer preach. When he thought he could no longer preach, he could no longer live. And so this is why. This is why. Thank God, people, I spoke. I hurried back to Big Spring till it flashed on the news that Rudy Esquivel was dead. I waited up till it showed it on the news. I sent Joe to get the newspapers the next morning. There was one statement in LA, New York, Kansas City, all of them, one sentence. I know it by heart. This is a direct quote. I do not know when I have ever seen an individual more calm, more peaceful, and more cheerful than this man was as he was about to meet his maker, said Attorney General Jim Maddox, who witnessed the execution of Rudy Esquivel. Many have walked into that room and laid on that gurney and died there calm. Some have died peaceful. How many do you think laid on that gurney and died cheerful? Rudy was singing a hymn. He was singing a hymn as they injected his veins. He was singing a hymn because he knows the secret that I know, that God accepts us any way we are. He accepts us flawed. So people, if you think that I stand up here and give this testimony to get you to feel sorry for crazy Virginia, she wants to stand up there and whine, tell you how she's been mistreated and judged all of her life. No way. The inmates would have laughed me out of those prisons long before now. I do not feel sorry for myself. I've never said, why me, Lord? I'm not one bit more important than one of them or someone here hurting tonight. And as to why, God, I think Joe asked it several times. The closest I came was when I watched them put my son in that same mental hospital 2 different times. But you know, I found out something. After about the 50th time through the book of Job, I found out God never did explain to Job why. Did he? There are only some things that God alone knows. We don't have to know all of the whys. I do not stand here and give this for therapy. One time would have been enough. I die a little each time I do it. But a wise Baptist preacher by the name of Sam Cathy over in Oklahoma said, Virginia, your healing is coming when you get to heaven. In the meantime, girls, stand up on that stage and die there. And that is what I'm trying to do. So many don't like me. I offend many with this testimony. Many come down the aisle and they say, Virginia, your testimony is not one of victory unless you can stand before us and tell us that you've been healed. And they reach out and they start to try to heal me. I do it in kindness and in love, but I do it firmly. I firmly push their hands away and I say, please, 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 please don't do that. Please leave me alone. If God wants me healed, man, he's got the power to heal me. And in the meantime, meantime, he's using me just exactly like I still am, crazy and flawed. Maybe if he healed me and he made me perfect, I wouldn't see the tears hidden behind the eyes. I wouldn't sob when I get the inmate letters. And people, I couldn't do what I did a couple of years ago. That son David that I told you about, he got his life together. He was psychologist at the State School for the Retarded in Abilene for 8 years. For the last 8.5 years, he was psychologist at the tough Ramsey II prison down near Houston. The last 4 months, he's one of the top head psychologists of the new Jester 4 treatment prison in Houston. David finally got his life together. But the second year that David was there at Ramsey II, we went in for the concert, and I got up to speak. And in a few moments, I noticed my son was gone. And I don't usually talk this long, so forgive me, people. And I thought, David, why'd you leave, honey? Are you ashamed of me? But I understood a few moments later. This was a very unusual prison, and the chapel was packed, about 450 guys. Now, I have heart trouble, and Dr. Wade gave me this new kind of spray, nitroglycerin. I'll have to take some when I finish. So that night there at the prison, they seated me there in a chair, and I took the nitroglycerin. But when I came to, security was wonderful. So they allowed the inmates, one by one, to slowly, all those 450, to file by my chair. At first they began to shake my hand. Then slowly, slowly, they began to kiss me upon the cheek. Their tears mingle with mine. I say it in the prisons, but I scream it out here in the free world. I say, it does not matter to me. Their tears never mingle with mine. I never reach up and wipe them away. I wear them out proudly. And it does not matter to me, people, if they are white tears, black tears, Spanish tears, Indian tears, mafia tears, syndicate tears, Aryan tears, blood tears, crip tears, AIDS tears. I never reach up and wipe them away. I wear them out proudly. If God healed me and made me perfect, I couldn't do what I did a few moments later. I noticed a young man when I walked in. You see, this was a very special prison there at Ramsey II. My son counseled some very special, as he called them, his clients. He wouldn't call them inmates. He had a wonderful warden. He said, Warden, is it okay if I counsel as a psychologist and share my faith with those that want to listen? So this young man, about 22 years old, sandy blonde hair, slowly walked up to my chair. And when he got there, he just stood there. And then he said, ma'am, I'm sorry. And he stuck his little thin, scaly hand back behind him. He said, I'm sorry, ma'am. I can't shake hands with you. I have a rash. But I reached out and I grabbed that little thin, scaly hand and brought it up to my cheek, but he pulled away. And he looked real frightened. And please don't judge him. You don't know what was done to him all his life. But I pulled his cheek down to mine. I said, honey, I whispered, I said, it's all right. It's all right. I understand. Maybe some of you have already figured it out. My son counsels some very special guys there in that unit, the AIDS patients. This young man, 22 years old, his name was Steve, was dying. He died 3.5 months later. Thank God, people, I reached out and gave him the last hug that he got. Thank God. So I used to say that when I get to heaven, the first one in that line to give me a great big hug and kiss will be Sister Kathleen and all those others that I named, Johnson, Kevin, all the others that I named. But you know what's having his way up there? It's going to be Rudy. And you know who's going to have a hold of Rudy's hand? It's going to be David Ray, waiting in that line in heaven for me. But you know the most beautiful thing of all? They're not going to be in those old Texas white grungies, the greens of Vacaville, where Manson was the first time. The blues of Quentin, Chino, Soledad, those old yellow suits of Tucker over there in Arkansas, or the red suits of Kentucky Death Row. They're going to be in brand new, clean, white robes of righteousness. But you know the most wonderful, beautiful thing of all? Not a one of them in that line in heaven is going to be flawed any longer, and neither will I. So this, people, is why I stand up here and keep trying to give this testimony, just in case there's one more. Like the little 15-year-old boy over there at Tucker in Arkansas. He's in Miss Virginia. I'm doing 299s back to back. You think God will ever accept me? I want to be able to stand there as long as I can and say, oh, yes, honey, He accepts us all. But I want to stand here tonight for a very special reason. First of all, I want to thank you for having us. Joe didn't tell you, but it's harder to get in Baptist churches than it is San Quentin. A little angel by the name of Lacey arranged this. So thank you for having us. Thank you for loving us. Thank you for listening. And please, if you are offended by anything that I said, do not blame anyone but me. But I still feel God gave me the message for you tonight. I will never, ever give it this way again. Thank you for being patient.